2 months ago, I did something I never thought I'd do. I fell in love. And that sounds sweet, right? Except I'm already married. And the man I fell for, he was never supposed to be anything more than my horse riding instructor. My name is Taylor, and yeah, this is going to get messy. I was never the girl with a perfect plan. I was just a girl with ambition and zero patience for waiting around for life to hand me something. I grew up watching people around me struggle. My mom working double shifts, my dad always stressed about bills, and I told myself early on, I am not living like that. I don't care what it takes. So when I landed an internship at one of the biggest companies in the city, I treated it like my one shot. I wasn't the smartest person in that office. I wasn't the most experienced, but I was paying attention, always. I watched how people moved, who had power, who didn't, who was lonely at the top. And that's when I noticed Pedro. Pedro wasn't just my boss. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and the whole energy shifted. Mid-40s, sharp dresser, owns 3 companies, one of them a luxury hotel that gets featured in magazines. He drove a car that cost more than most people's apartments. And he had this smile, this confident, slow smile, like he already knew how every story ended. He was the kind of man I had studied my whole life. I knew exactly what type of woman he liked. I had watched him enough to know. He liked someone put together, someone who listened, someone who made him feel like the most interesting man in the room without being too obvious about it. And I was exactly that. Look, I'm not going to dress it up. I pursued Pedro with intention. Not because I was in love with him. I wasn't. But I knew that getting close to him meant never worrying about rent again, never watching my account go to zero the day before payday, never asking anyone for help. Was it cold? Maybe. Was it calculated? Absolutely. But the life I wanted wasn't going to fall into my lap just because I wished hard enough for it. So I made myself indispensable. At work first, staying late, volunteering for projects no one else wanted, learning his schedule, his preferences, what frustrated him, and what made his day easier. Then slowly, in the small moments between meetings and late nights at the office, I let something more personal develop. He started inviting me to business dinners, then dinners that had nothing to do with business. Then one evening, he looked at me across the table at a restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, and he said, "You're different, Taylor." And I smiled and said, "Different how?" And he said, "You're the first person in a long time who actually makes me feel like a person and not just a title." I kept my face soft and warm. Inside, I noted, "Target acquired." About 8 months into our relationship, Pedro organized a company event, a big anniversary celebration for the firm. All the employees, a whole production. And in front of everyone, in front of the entire company I had started in as a nobody intern, Pedro got down on one knee. He said I had changed his life, that he hadn't felt this alive in years, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. The room went silent. I looked at him, this powerful, wealthy, emotionally available man kneeling in front of me, and I said, "Yes." And I meant it, just not in the way he thought. The first year of marriage was easier than I expected. Pedro was generous, not in an over-the-top look-at-me way. He just quietly made sure my life was comfortable. Trips to places I had only seen in pictures, jewelry I never asked for, a closet full of things that still had tags because I had so many options I couldn't keep up. And he loved me, genuinely, deeply loved me. That part was harder to deal with than I expected. Because when someone loves you that honestly and you're not giving them the same thing back, you feel it. Every morning when he kissed my forehead before going to work, every night when he asked about my day like my answer was the most important thing in the world to him, every time he looked at me like I was something he still couldn't believe he had. I wasn't miserable. I want to be clear about that. I had grown comfortable. I liked my life. I liked Pedro as a person, as a partner in the practical sense. I just didn't love him. But I had convinced myself that was okay, that love was overrated anyway, that stability and safety were more valuable than some feeling that people write songs about and then cry over when it disappears. I had built something real. I wasn't going to throw it away chasing a feeling. And then, year 3, I decided I wanted to learn how to ride horses. It had been a dream of mine since I was a little girl. I used to watch show jumping competitions on TV and just feel something pull at my chest. My mom could never afford lessons, so it became one of those things I filed away under someday. And now I had the money. Now I had the time. So I called a stable about 40 minutes from the house and signed up for beginner lessons. I never imagined what was waiting for me there. His name was Noah. He was my instructor. Mid-30s, a little rough around the edges in the best way, like someone who had lived a real life and wore it comfortably. Dark eyes, quiet voice, the kind of guy who didn't say much, but when he did, you actually listened. The first lesson, he barely looked at me. He was professional, direct. He showed me the basics, how to approach the horse, how to hold the reins, how to communicate through your posture and your hands and your weight. I remember thinking, this man does not care who I am outside of this stable, and I found that interesting. Because my whole life, especially since marrying Pedro, I had been in rooms where people knew exactly who I was, or who I was connected to. There was always a layer of performance to everything, everyone playing their role. But Noah didn't know me. He just saw a woman who needed to learn not to grip the reins so hard. The second lesson, he started to open up a little. Small things. A dry joke about how my horse, Pharaoh, was the most dramatic animal on the property and somehow I had been assigned to him. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not my polished social laugh, but something real that caught me off guard. The third lesson, I caught him looking at me. Not in a weird way, just noticing. And something in my chest did something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I started going to lessons more than I needed to. Twice a week became 3 times, then 4. I told Pedro I was really getting into it, and he was happy for me. He even offered to buy me my own horse. I said, not yet. The truth was, I wasn't going for the horse anymore. Noah and I started talking after lessons, just casually at first, standing by the fence while the horses settled, him with his arms crossed, me trying to act like I wasn't manufacturing reasons to stay longer. We talked about where we grew up, what we'd wanted to be as kids, things we'd given up on and things we hadn't. He was different. Different from Pedro. Different from anyone I'd been around in years. He didn't talk about deals or strategy or status. He talked about things that actually mattered, at least to him. The land, the horses, a trip he had taken once across the countryside and how it had reset something in him. He was honest in a way that felt almost uncomfortable, and I got obsessed. I don't know when exactly it shifted from interested to something I couldn't stop thinking about, but one afternoon after a lesson, it was raining and we were standing inside the barn and he was fixing something on one of the bridles, and I was leaning against the wall watching him, and he looked up and said, "You're still here?" And I said, "I guess I am." And something passed between us that we both understood and neither of us said anything about. I drove home that day with my hands gripping the wheel and my heart doing something stupid, and I thought, Taylor, what are you doing? But I already knew. I was falling for him. I never imagined that this day would come. I had been so sure of myself, so sure I had built a wall around the part of me that could get confused by feelings. And here I was, 3 years into a marriage I had engineered, falling apart over a man who wore dusty boots and never once tried to impress me. And the worst part? I think that's exactly why. He had no idea who Pedro was, no idea about the hotel, the companies, the lifestyle. When he talked to me, he wasn't talking to Pedro's wife. He was just talking to Taylor, and I had almost forgotten what that felt like. But here's where things started to unravel. Pedro noticed. He didn't say anything at first. Pedro was smart that way. He observed before he spoke. But I started to catch small things. He'd ask questions about the lessons with a little too much detail. How long was the lesson today? Who else was there? You seem distracted. Is everything okay? I kept my answers clean and simple. Fine, good, just tired. But one night at dinner, this quiet Tuesday night where it was just the two of us and the city visible through the glass, Pedro put down his fork and looked at me. "You've changed," he said. Not accusatory, just a statement, like he was reading something he wasn't sure how to interpret yet. I said, "I'm just going through some things, work stress, nothing serious." He nodded slowly, "Okay." But his eyes didn't let go of mine right away, and I felt it, this cold little current running through me, because Pedro was not a man who missed things. He had built empires by reading people correctly, and he was reading me. I started being more careful, more present at home, more deliberate about my affection toward him. I was performing again, but this time the performance was to protect something I was terrified of losing. Not the money, not the house, my secret. Because here's the thing, I had a past that Pedro didn't fully know about. Things I had done before him, choices I had made that I was not proud of, and I had always carried this fear, sitting low in my stomach. If he ever found out who I really was before all this, not just the intern who worked her way up, but the full picture, would he still look at me the same way? I had always been afraid of losing what I had built by revealing my past, and now I had a second secret piling on top of the first. Noah and I had never crossed a physical line. I need to say that. But emotional lines, we had walked past those weeks ago, and neither of us had stopped to acknowledge it. One afternoon, he told me something. We were walking the trail beside the stable, and he said, "I don't usually talk to people like this." I asked what he meant. He said, "I mean, honestly, without thinking about what I should say." I stopped walking. He stopped too. And he looked at me in this way that made me feel like everything I had built my life around, the strategy, the comfort, the careful management of everything, just didn't matter for a second. He said, "I don't know what's going on with you, but I know something is." I almost told him everything right then. About Pedro, about the way we had started, about the fear I carried, about how I wasn't who I appeared to be. But I didn't. Because I was scared, and because telling the truth would have made it real. Then came the revelation I never saw coming. A week later, Pedro came home early. He sat down across from me in the living room and placed his phone on the table, face up, screen visible. I looked down. It was a photo. Me and Noah, standing by the fence after a lesson, close. Not touching, but close in a way that told a story. Pedro had hired someone. I don't know when, I don't know how long. He said, very quietly, "Tell me what I'm looking at." And everything I had built, every careful structure, every wall, every version of Taylor I had crafted over the years started cracking. I told him the truth. Not all of it at once, but I started. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I told him that I had feelings for Noah, that nothing had happened, but that I couldn't keep pretending it hadn't affected me. And then, because I was already bleeding, I told him the rest, about who I was before him, about the choices I wasn't proud of, about the fear I had carried for 3 years that he would one day find out and leave. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I was done, the room was so quiet I could hear the city outside. Pedro looked at me for a long time, and then he said something I will never forget. He said, "I already knew. Not about Noah, that was new, but about my past, about my reasons for getting close to him in the beginning." He said someone had told him early on, a colleague, someone who thought they were protecting him, and he had looked into it, and he had found enough to know. I stared at him. He said, I chose to love you anyway because I watched who you became, not just who you were. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, honestly, because here was this man I had underestimated from the beginning, telling me he had seen through me and loved me anyway. And here I was, having spent 2 months chasing a feeling with someone else, and in doing so had almost thrown away the one person who had ever actually chosen me, fully, knowingly, without conditions. I'm still figuring out what comes next. Noah and I don't see each other anymore. I stopped the lessons. Pedro and I are in a complicated place, but we're talking, actually talking, maybe for the first time. I spent so long thinking love was something I was too smart to fall for, too practical, too focused. But love, real love, doesn't care how smart you are. It doesn't care about your plan. It just shows up. And sometimes it shows up in the form of someone you've been taking for granted for 3 years. And sometimes the biggest revelation isn't someone else's secret, it's your own. If you made it this far, honestly, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from.